Two-leaved or tamarack pine, Pinus cortata. This species forms the bulk of the alpine forest, extending along the range above the Furor zone up to a height of from 8,000 to 9,500 feet above the sea, growing in beautiful order upon moraines that are scarcely changed as yet by post-glacial weathering. Compared with the giants of the lower zones, this is a small tree, seldom attaining a height of 100 feet. The largest specimen I ever measured was 90 feet in height and a little over 6 feet in diameter, 4 feet from the ground. The average height of mature trees throughout the entire belt is probably not far from 50 or 60 feet, with a diameter of 2 feet. It is a well-proportioned, rather handsome little pine with grayish-brown bark, and gradually takes a horizontal position about halfway up the trunk, then aspire more and more towards the summit, thus forming a sharp conical top. This foliage is short and rigid, 2 leaves in a fascicle arranged in comparatively long cylindrical tassels at the ends of the tough, upcurving branchlets. The cones are about 2 inches long, growing in stiff, brilliant flowers. The sterile cones are more showy on account of their great abundance, often giving a reddish-yellow tinge to the whole mass of the foliage and filling the air with pollen. No other pine on the range is so densely planted as this one. Moraine forests sweep along the sides of the high rocky valleys for miles without an interruption. Still, strictly speaking, they are not dense, for flecks of sunshine and flowers find their way into the darkest places, where the trees grow tallest and thickest. Tall, nutritious grasses are especially abundant beneath them, growing all over in the ground in sunshine and shade, over extensive areas like a farmer's crop, and serving as pasture for the multitude of sheep that are driven from the arid plains every summer as soon as the snow is melted. The two-leaf pine, more than any other, is subject to destruction by fire. The thin bark is streaked and sprinkled with resin as though it has been showered down upon it like rain, so that even the green trees catch fire readily, and during strong winds whole forests are destroyed, the flames leaping from tree to tree, forming one continuous belt of roaring fire that goes surging and racing onward above the bending woods, like the grass fires of a prairie. During the calm, dry season of Indian summer, the fire creeps quietly along the ground, feeding on the dry needles and burrs. Then, arriving at the foot of the tree, the resiny bark is ignited, and the heated air ascends in powerful currents, increasing in velocity and dragging the flames swiftly upward. Then the leaves catch fire, and an immense column of flame, beautifully spired on the edges, and tinted a rose-purple hue, rushes aloft 30 or 40 feet above the top of the tree, forming a grand spectacle. Especially on a dark night, it lasts, however, only a few seconds, vanishing with magical rapidity, to be succeeded by others along the fire line at irregular intervals for weeks at a time, tree after tree flashing and darkening, leaving the trunks and branches hardly scarred. The heat, however, is sufficient to kill the trees, and in a few years the bark shrivels and falls off. Belts miles in extent are thus killed and left standing with branches on, peeled and ridges appearing gray in the distance like misty clouds. Later the branches drop off, leaving a forest of bleached spars. At length the roots decay, and the forlorn trunks are blown down during the storm, and piled upon another, encumbering the ground until they are consumed by the next fire, and leave it ready for a fresh crop. The endurance of the species is shown by its wandering occasionally out over the lava plains with yellow pine, and climbing moraineless mountainsides with the dwarf pine clinging to any chance support in rifts and crevices of storm-beaten rocks. Always, however, showing the effects of such hardships in every feature. Down in sheltered lake hollows on beds of rich alluvium, it varies so far from the common form as frequently to be taken from distinct species, where it grows in dense sods, like grasses from 40 to 80 feet high, bending altogether to be the breeze and whirling and eddying in gusts more lively than any other tree in the woods. I have frequently found specimens 50 feet high, less than 5 inches in diameter, being thus slender and at the same time well clad in leafy boughs. It is oftentimes bent to the ground when laden with soft snow, forming beautiful arches in endless variety, some of which last until the melting of the snow in spring. Mountain pine, Pinus monticola. The mountain pine is the king of the alpine woods, brave, hardy, and long-lived, towering grandly above its companions, and becoming stronger and more imposing just where the other species begin to crouch and disappear. At its best, it is usually about 90 feet high and 5 or 6 feet in diameter, though a specimen is often met considerably larger than this. The trunk is as massive and suggestive of enduring strength as that of an oak. About 2/3 of the trunk is commonly free of limbs, but close, fringy tufts of sprays occur all the way down, like those which adorn the colossal shafts of the sequoia. The bark is deep reddish brown upon trees that occupy exposed situations near its upper limit, and furrowed rather deeply, the main furrows running nearly parallel with each other, and connected by conspicuous cross furrows, which, with one exception, are, as far as I have noticed, peculiar to the species. The cones are from 4 to 8 inches long, slender, cylindrical, and somewhat curved, resembling those of the common white pine in the Atlantic coast. They grow in clusters from about 3 to 6 or 7, becoming pendulous as they increase in weight, chiefly by the bending of branches. This species is nearly related to the sugar pine, and though not half so tall, it constantly suggests its noble relative in the way that it extends its long arms and general habit. The mountain pine is first met on the upper margin of the fir zone, growing singly in a subdued and conspicuous form, in what appears as a chance situations, without making much impression on the general forest. Continuing up through the two-leaf pines in the same scattered growth, it begins to show its character. At an elevation of about 10,000 feet, attains its noblest development near the middle of the range, tossing its tough arms in frosty air, welcoming storms and feeding on them, and reaching the grand old age of 1,000 years. Juniper or red cedar, Juniperus occidentalis. The juniper is preeminently a rock tree, occupying the baldest domes and pavements. Where there is scarcely a handful of soil at a height of from 7,000 to 9,500 feet. In such situations, the trunk is frequently over 8 feet in diameter, not much more in height. The top is almost always dead in old trees, and great stubborn limbs push out horizontally that are mostly broken and bare at the ends, but densely covered with and embedded here and there with bossy mounds of gray foliage. Some are mere weathered stumps as broad and long, decorated with a few leafy sprays reminding one of the crumbling towers of some ancient castle scantily draped with ivy. Only upon the headwaters of the Carson have I found this species established on a good moraine soil. Here it flourishes with the silver and two-leaf pines in great beauty and luxuriance, attaining a height of from 40 to 60 feet and manifesting but little of that rocky angularity so characteristic a feature throughout the greater portion of its range. Two of the largest growing at a head of Hope Valley measured 29 feet 3 inches and 25 feet 6 inches in circumference. Respectively 4 feet from the ground, the bark is of bright cinnamon color, and 30 trees beautifully braided and reticulated, flaking off in thin, lustrous ribbons that are sometimes used by Indians for tent making. Its fine color and odd picturesqueness always catch an artist's eye, but to me the juniper seems a singularly dull and taciturn tree. Never speaking to one's heart, I have spent many a day and night in its company, in all kinds of weather, and have ever found it silent, cold, and rigid like a column of ice. Its broad stumpiness, and of course, precludes all possibility of wavering or even shaking, but it is not this rocky steadfastness that constitutes its silence. In calm sun days, the sugar pine preaches the grandeur of the mountains like an apostle without moving a leaf. On level rocks it dies standing and wastes insensibly out of existence like granite, the wind exerting about as little control over it alive or dead as it does over a glacier boulder. Some are undoubtedly over 2,000 years old. All the trees of the alpine woods suffer more or less from avalanches. The two-leaved pine, most of all, gaps 200 or 300 yards wide, extending from the upper limit of a tree to the bottoms of the valleys and lake basins, are of common occurrence in all the upper forests, resembling the clearings of settlers in the old backwoods. Scarcely a tree is spared. Even the soil is scraped away, like while the thousands of uprooted pines and spruces are piled upon one another, heads downward and tucked snugly in along the lines of the clearing in two wood rows. Like lateral moraines, the pines lay with branches wilted and drooping like weeds. Not so the early junipers, after braving in silence the storms of perhaps a dozen or 20 centuries. They seem in this their last calamity to become somewhat communicative, making sign of a very unwilling acceptance of their fate, holding themselves well up from the ground on knees and elbows, seemingly ill at ease and anxious, like stubborn wrestlers, to rise again.